Hi, everybody. Welcome to Statistics Solutions webinar on Chapter 1, the introduction. Just a couple of things before we get started. We do have a support person on with us, and that person can answer any kind of questions you have related that are non-content related. Like where to obtain copies of the PowerPoint. We have a YouTube channel. You can access them from there. We also do archive the presentations on our website, so you could also access it from there. Okay, so this is Chapter 1. We do give webinars on other chapters and other topics throughout the week, so check our calendar, see what we're doing for that particular week. Okay, so this is the introduction. A good way to think about the introduction is that it's like a blueprint or like the plans for your study. Usually the proposal, which is setting up the study, proposing what you're going to do, includes chapters 1, 2, and 3. Typically, Chapter 1 is the introduction, Chapter 2 is the lit review, and Chapter 3, you describe the methodology in more depth than you do in Chapter 1. Chapters 4 and 5 are typically the results and the discussion of the results. Now, having said that, this is a general, fairly typical 5-chapter model of the social studies dissertation. I'm going to say this a couple times throughout the presentation. Make sure you obtain your school's particular template or guidelines for the chapters. While there is a lot of commonality among schools, there are differences sometimes. So sometimes there'll be, some schools want more than 5 chapters. It's typically the same content, they just kind of split it up a little differently. Or within the chapters, different schools will have, different sections, or the sections will be in a different order. So there are some differences that you want to pay attention to and get your school specific template. Having said that, though, there are a lot of commonalities. So kind of a general approach typically works. And it will be fine for us to understand kind of the basic components of Chapter 1. Okay, which are these. The introduction of the introduction, background, research problem, purpose, theoretical framework, definitions, significance. I've collapsed some of the other sections at the end into one section because not all schools require them. And summary. Okay, the introduction to the introduction. Typically not too long, a solid paragraph, maybe 2, 3. You don't need to go on and on in the introduction. You want to get pretty quickly to the organizational or social problem that you're going to be studying. Typically it's, you want to catch the reader's attention, to help say, why this issue is important or dire or needs attention. Sometimes you can use statistics or numbers. If we're talking about, for example, attrition of, public school teachers leaving the profession. If you have a catching, a fairly alarming statistic to put in there, that helps show the reader, catches their attention, but also shows the reader that this is an important issue. Look at the numbers, look at the statistics. Of course, you want those numbers and those statistics to be as recent as possible. Don't start talking about teacher attrition and use, numbers from 2011. That's good. Those numbers are going to be out of date. Or even some kind of a statement, a supported observation that helps emphasize the importance of the issue. You also then want to talk about what is the research on the issue? So if it's attrition of student teachers in public education or at a certain level, what does the research say? This is kind of broad strokes here because this is the introduction. Just kind of what are some of the major trends in the research that what has been done, what hasn't been done. You're going to talk about all this stuff later when you get to the background and to the research problem. So you just need to mention it. Mention why the study is needed, right? If we have, attrition, here's some of the research that's been done on it. But what hasn't been done, what is still needed. Okay, that's where your study is going to come in. State what is needed to address the research problem. We need research from a certain angle on a certain population, whatever happens to be. That's where your study comes in. So at the end of the section, the reader should know what you're studying and why. Okay. And again, this is all kind of nutshelled because it's the introduction. You can end with a preview of the sections of the chapter if you'd like. And let me just pause here for a minute to say, attending our webinars, a great resource. It's great that you're doing that. There's other resources on the internet. We do have other resources on our website, documents, supporting documents, and that's all great. But I also encourage you to get an example of a dissertation from your school is, close to what you're doing, an approved dissertation, so you can actually see, so you can get an example of how people are handling these sections. It just sometimes it makes it easier to have a concrete example rather than just having, suggestions and directives. Okay, typically next comes the background. This is the background on the problem, so it's pretty focused. So you're going to include some historical material here because, where's the problem been? How has it developed? What are the contours of it? What are some of the trends of some of the major research that's been done on it? And it's going to take you up to the present, right? So it's kind of a little story. And when I use the word story, I use that in quotation marks. Obviously, it has nothing to do with fiction, but it's kind of a little story supported with citations about, where the problem emerged, how it's developed, the contours of it, the research that's been done on it. So we can see that what's been done and how it's been handled, and then leading to ultimately what hasn't been done, and the need, so it ends with where the research stands on the topic, which also shows what hasn't been done, which you want to highlight, which is what your study is designed to do to address the research problem or whatever gap there is in the research. So it's kind of the contours and the trends. It's kind of an overview of the contours and the trends of the research on the issue, helping to set up what hasn't been done and the need for your own study. Which should lead directly into the research problem, which is a more targeted overview, okay, of the recent research on your topic. So you don't have that kind of historical contour. You're more kind of focused on your specific research problem, more focused on recent research, and really help kind of define the recent research on the topic. And in doing that, you should also be able to emphasize, researchers have done A, B, C, and D, but they haven't done E, right? So it's kind of what the research problem is. It's showing what's been done on the topic, but also showing the holes or the problems or the issues in the research or the gaps. And that is what your study is designed to fill. So you want to specifically state the research problem, specifically state that your study is designed to address the research problem. Okay. Next comes the purpose. And the purpose is really a kind of a statement, like it's what you're doing in your study in a nutshell, in one statement. And they typically have a specific language in a specific order. And I've given you examples here. There's a qualitative example and a quantitative example, but generally the purpose statement itself starts off the purpose of this approach, designed qualitative correlational study is to examine, explore, examine, or investigate is typically used with quantitative studies. Explore is typically used with qualitative studies, but it kind of depends on what you're doing too. The variables or concepts in your specific sample and setting. So I'll just read one of the examples because they're the purpose of this quantitative correlational study is to examine the relationship between transformational leadership and emotional intelligence and you have the specifics of your sample and your setting. Qualitative example generally follows the same pattern, but some of the language is different because it's qualitative. You'll have explore instead of examine, and you won't have variables per se, but you'll have whatever concept or whatever issue that you're exploring. The purpose section may also include specific information about the variables, your major concepts, or the instruments that you're using. Again, just follow your template, see what your template requires, and again, look at examples. Not a long section. I apologize about the dogs working from home. The research questions typically come next. I'm not a methodological expert, so if you're interested in how to devise and develop research questions, I encourage you to attend a methodological webinar. But this is where you would state the research questions. The theoretical framework typically comes next. The big question is theoretical framework or conceptual framework. What's the difference? I don't know, there's papers written on the difference, but for our purposes, typically theoretical framework is associated with quantitative studies. Conceptual framework is associated with qualitative studies. And that's usually because for quantitative studies, you're using instruments or surveys to get information, to get data from your participants. And these surveys always have a theoretical foundation. They always have a foundation based in theory. And for qualitative studies, sometimes there's not a theory that will kind of encompass what you're doing. You have to use kind of concepts, major concepts. Sometimes you have to have a couple to kind of put together to make a framework. So what the theory does, it kind of helps explain your results. And in the case of qualitative studies, it also helps guide your interview questions because you will need some kind of guiding ideas for your interview questions. They just can't kind of seem random. So your framework helps you with that. It helps you focus your interview questions. So to handle this section, basically just start off by saying such and such theory will serve as a theoretical framework for this study. Obviously name the theory, have a source for the theory, who developed it. You want to include and define any components that are associated with the theory. Obviously, you want to define the theory as well. You mentioned who developed it, what the person developed it for, what did they develop it to explain, a little bit about what researchers have used the theory for. And the big part is how it connects to your study. How is it going to help you explain what you're studying? And this is a really good, it's kind of a tricky section, but once you get a handle on it, not so much. So this is a good one to look at samples. A little note here about quantitative studies. If you're using a survey developed by let's say researcher A, let's say emotional intelligence. You're using a survey to measure emotional intelligence, and your survey was developed by researcher A. Well, then you don't want to use researcher B's theory for it. Okay, so the theoretical basis of your surveys and the theory need to align. Okay, because here's the point. Let's stick with emotional intelligence. There are several surveys that will measure emotional intelligence. Okay, so again, if you're using Goleman's survey, don't use Mayer's theory. Use Goleman's theory. So make sure that the theoretical basis, the theory, and the survey all align. And when possible, keep the theories to a minimum. If one theory will do it, fine. If you need two, that's okay. I wouldn't, getting more than two, it starts to complexify things. And it's really best to have a streamlined approach to the theory, like just what you need. You don't need, I've seen people just include, throw in theories, 34 theories. And do you really need all those? I mean, it complexifies things. You have to explain all those theories. You have to explain how they connect to your study. You're going to have to talk to them and talk about them in the discussion chapter. So keep the theory section as streamlined as possible. Nature of the study or study design. Again, this is a method section that I'm not going to go into, just to say that it usually involves a rationale for the selection of your design. Why did you choose this design? Why? What kind of information can it give you that aligns with what you're doing with your research problem? Summarize the methodology, including from whom and how data will be collected and how the data will be analyzed. Again, if you're interested in more information on the methodological aspects, tune into a methods webinar. Definitions. Okay, the definition section. This is where you define major concepts, variables of your study. This section really doesn't need any introduction other than just the following terms will be defined for use in this study, and that's fine. And then just get to your definitions. Again, they're major concepts that you're going to be using in your study. They're variables, anything that's specific to your study, right? That's not general kind of common knowledge. Definitions should take the form of sentences. They should be clear and succinct. In other words, definitions are not discussions. So you don't need to say things like, well, there are several definitions of, work culture in the research. So-and-so defines it as this, and somebody else defines it as this. Again, they're not discussions, they're definitions. So define the term as you will be using it in your study. That's the whole point. And usually a sentence, maybe two sentences. Again, just clear, succinct, short, to the point. Definitions should be supported with peer-reviewed sources. Absolutely no dictionary definitions. Don't use the dictionary as a source. Don't use dictionary definitions. They're general. You need definitions from the literature, from peer-reviewed sources. Again, I apologize about that. Okay, no general dictionary definitions as you're using them in your study, definitions from the literature. Sources, your citation should be recent when possible. They don't always have to be. That becomes more important later in the chapter and especially in the lit review. Okay, significance. Sometimes this is called implications. Basically, this is the so what. Like professors like to say, this is the so what of your section of the chapter one. So you're going to do this. and it's going to involve this population. Okay, so why is it important? What is the significance going to be? And usually there's two prongs to this section. Implications for research or theory, and practical implications. So practical implications is just like it sounds. How will your findings, or how might your findings inform practice? How might your findings inform what people do on the ground level? You know, again, if it's attrition of teachers, how might that information you know, be practical not only to teachers themselves, but to administrators, right? What can it tell administrators? Well, it might tell them why they're leaving. That's important to administrators, right? Then they can understand why they're leaving and devise, you know, maybe interventions or support to keep teachers from leaving. So, and the other prong is research. What are your findings going to add to the research? You know, are they going to give us like maybe information from a perspective that we haven't had before? Is it going to focus on something that we haven't focused on in the past? So how are your findings potentially going to add to research? Other sections, like I said, I lumped some of these in. Again, check your template. Some schools require these, some schools don't. Usually all schools require a section called limitations. This is where you would discuss potential weaknesses or shortcomings that may affect the results. So obviously we're still kind of, excuse me for a minute, I'll be right back. Back. Again, I apologize. The dogs just decided they wanted to get restless and you know, play rough at this moment. So they're in the room, which I should have thought about beforehand. Okay, limitations. Obviously, we're still, in some respects, dealing with COVID. So potential limitation could be, you know, related to COVID. You can't do face-to-face interviews. You know, some place that you wanted to get your information from is shut down, or only allowing, you know, limited access. So there may be wrinkles related to that. Limitations for quantitative studies could involve, you know, maybe you can't get enough participants and your study will be underpowered. Limitation for qualitative studies can involve, you know, bias. So anything that you think might affect the results. And of course, this is predictive. You're not sure, but you're talking about potentially what could happen. Assumptions, and again, these are good sections if you're required to include these. Got an example. They're a little tricky, but they're not hard, and they're usually short. Assumptions are things that researchers can't control, so they have to assume certain things. And one of them, a big one, is that you can't control your participants, right? You can't control how they respond. So you have to assume that their answers are honest and straightforward. It's just something you have to, you know, you just have to take for granted. You just have to assume it. Scope, this is also sometimes called delimitations. Delimitations is confusing because it has the word limitations in it, and it makes you think of limitations, but they're not the same. So I just use the word scope, which is the same thing. And if you remember, movies, old movies, or even cartoons, and they show, they have somebody looking through like a telescope or a looking glass, or like a submarine periscope, and you see it represented on the screen like a circle, right? And it's black on the outside, and you only see what's in the scope. That's what it's like. So the scope is the boundaries of your study, what you're focusing on. Okay, so it's going to sound very similar to kind of your population and your setting, but it kind of defines like, here's what I'm focusing on, and I'm not focusing on these other things. So if you're focusing on, attrition of school teachers, you're not focusing on administration, you're not focusing on students, you're not focusing on, other related issues, you're focusing on attrition, and you're focusing on that population. Okay, also in here, you should probably talk a little bit about the generalizability of your results. And what that means is, how well might your results generalize or be, translatable to the larger population. Usually, if your study is quantitative, and if you get, an adequate sample, chances are your results should generalize pretty well. Qualitative studies are not, the results are not designed to generalize to the larger population, because by necessity, qualitative studies have small samples, and they're designed to get in-depth information that quantitative studies can't get. So it's worth mentioning that if you're doing a qualitative study, that your study, that your findings won't generalize, but they're not designed to. Okay, summary. Like any summary, recap major points of the chapter. Remind the reader of the research problem and why your study is needed. And you can end by transitioning to the next chapter. And I don't know what it is, but sometimes folks, maybe they're tired of writing the chapter, they get to the summary and they're like, yeah. And they give what I call a fake summary, which is like, well, I did this, this, and this. It's not really a summary, just they'll list like the sections. I included this section and this section. That's not a recapping of the major points. So make sure you have a kind of an actual summary rather than just kind of a list of like the sections in there, which usually won't pass, the muster of professors anyway. Okay, and here's our information, our contact information about us. If you think you want to talk to somebody about what we do, it's a free meeting. It'll just give you more information about what we do and what we offer and prices and things like that. So feel free to contact the contact email or the phone number. Okay, are there any questions? Again, I apologize about the dogs, but they're quiet. They're in the back room. Any questions? Anybody? I mean, you can go ahead and type them into the chat box or the question and answer box, either one. Okay, if there's no questions, then I will wish you luck. And again, we run different webinars on, okay, we do have a question here. Let's see. Is it possible to have both a conceptual and theoretical framework in your study? I've never seen it. I suppose it's possible. I don't know why you would need one of each. Yeah, so I wouldn't really worry about that. If you're doing, quantitative, have a theoretical framework. If you're doing qualitative, have a conceptual. I wouldn't know why you would need two. So unless your chair asks you to do it for some reason, but I don't know. It doesn't sound like something that anyone would require. My chair did, and I don't understand either. Did you ask your chair about it? Yeah, if your chair requires, okay, no, I haven't yet, but I will. Yeah, if your chair is looking for something that's a little outside of the norm, you're just gonna have to go to them and ask them and have them explain it to you and see if they can provide you with an example. Now, if you're doing a mixed methods, is the only reason I can see why your chair might want a conceptual framework and a theoretical framework. Mixed methods, you have a quantitative portion and a qualitative portion, and you might need a theoretical framework for one and a conceptual framework for the other part. I could see that, although I still don't see many of, requiring two. Okay. Mine is quantitative only using secondary data. Okay. Then it would seem to me that you would only need a theoretical framework. Yeah, then you would just talk to your chair and see if they can explain it to you. And again, see what your template says. Just make sure that your chair is not misreading the template. Okay. But yeah, I'm not sure why your chair is asking me that. That seems odd to me. Will qualitative study need research questions? Absolutely. All studies need research questions. I mean, they're what guide the study. You may only have like one research question or two, but you also have interview questions, which are different. Those are the things you ask your participants. But the research question is the overall guiding inquiry for your study. So yes, qualitative studies require research questions. Any other questions? Is exploratory factor analysis adequate if one is constructing a tool with item pool based over theoretical framework? I'm not sure. Exploratory factor analysis is a method that's methods related. I'm not sure because I'm not a methods person. I would attend a methods webinar and ask the methods person because I'm not really sure what exploratory factor analysis involves. So that's my answer for that. I apologize about that, but that's out of my area. Okay, and just a quick note about talking to your chairs. Elsie was mentioning, wanting two different frameworks. I know some people are hesitant to talk to their chair. For whatever reason, you've been out of touch for a while, they intimidate you. There's different reasons, but I mean, your chair is there. They have a role, they have a job, and part of their role is to assist you. And so you should never feel bad, or you should never be hesitant about contacting your chair. I mean, now there's a way that you can bug them too much, like if you just kind of ask them question after question and it's relentless. But if it's just a well-intentioned, I don't understand this, can you, or why do I need two frameworks, can you explain that to me? You're well within your right to contact your chair. So I guess my point is to say that don't feel bad about having to reach out to your chair, because that's part of their role. That's part of what they're there for. Okay. Any other questions about the chapter 1? All right, great. Well, again, I'm going to wish you luck and wish you have a great day, a great week. And again, check in our calendar to see what other webinars we're running and see if you'd like to attend those. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.